On April 4, 1969, CBS did something unprecedented. They fired a show that was literally their biggest hit, that won multiple Emmy Awards, and had just been renewed for a fourth season 2 weeks earlier. But this wasn't about ratings. The Smothers brothers had brought in activist folk singers Pete Seeger and Joan Baez, produced political material criticizing the Vietnam War, and challenged President Lyndon Johnson on primetime television. Then came one moment, a single 5-minute performance that would change everything. A comedian named David Steinberg performed a parody sermon. CBS ordered it removed, and when Tom Smothers refused, the network canceled the entire show. But what really happened? And why did it matter so much? When the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour first premiered on CBS in February 1967, nobody was worried. The network saw two polished, well-groomed comedians who played instruments and told gentle jokes. Tom and Dick Smothers looked like they'd stepped out of a 1950s dream. Nothing about them screamed danger. But CBS didn't understand what was actually happening. The Smothers brothers weren't performing for their parents' generation. They were performing for America's kids, the ones who were marching in the streets, protesting the Vietnam War, questioning authority, and demanding change. These weren't kids who wanted to see corny variety shows. They wanted to see something real, something that spoke to them. The show aired on Sunday nights, right across from NBC's Bonanza, one of the most watched programs in America. And somehow, this little show with two guys and their guitars started winning. It won Emmy Awards. It pulled in younger viewers that sponsors actually wanted to reach. CBS looked at the ratings and couldn't believe their luck. For the first season, there was almost nothing controversial about it. Just music, comedy, some talented guests. But then something shifted. The brothers realized they had a platform. They realized millions of people were watching. And they started asking themselves, what's the point of having this much reach if you're just going to tell the same old jokes everyone's been telling for decades? That's when they made a choice that would end their show forever. Instead of playing it safe, they started talking about things that mattered. Things that made network executives very, very nervous. The question wasn't whether they would push boundaries. It was how far they were willing to go. And that answer would become the most important battle in television history. The transformation happened gradually, but it was unmistakable. In 1967, the show started becoming increasingly political. The brothers invited activist celebrities onto their show, including folk singers Pete Seeger and Joan Baez and singer-actor Harry Belafonte. The show also produced its own political material criticizing the Vietnam War and the politicians who supported it, not least President Lyndon Johnson. This might not sound shocking to us now. We live in an age where every talk show host makes political jokes every single night. But you have to understand what 1967 was like. Network television was supposed to be neutral, safe, family-friendly. Nobody wanted to rock the boat, especially not when the government didn't like what you were saying. Pete Seeger was a perfect example of what the Smothers brothers were doing differently. Bringing on Seeger was a daring move, given that he'd been blacklisted from network television for better part of 2 decades, though CBS's censors made sure to cut out the most politically sensitive parts of his act. They literally had to censor him live on air. But Tom Smothers kept pushing. He didn't want a censored version of Pete Seeger. He wanted the real thing. Joan Baez came on the show too. She wasn't just a singer. She was married to a man who was in prison for refusing to fight in Vietnam. That was an act of protest that CBS absolutely hated. Every time these artists appeared, the phones lit up. Angry letters poured in. Affiliate stations in conservative parts of the country started calling CBS, threatening to drop the show. But here's the thing. The Smothers brothers didn't back down. They actually doubled down. They started creating their own sketches about the war. They made jokes that criticized the Nixon administration. They were using comedy as a weapon, and network executives hated it. CBS started assigning censors specifically to watch the show. Every script had to be approved. Every guest had to be vetted. Every song had to be checked word by word. The network was trapped. They couldn't cancel a show that was this popular and winning this many awards without looking like censors themselves. But they also couldn't let Tom and Dick Smothers keep pushing boundaries like this. Something was going to give. And when it did, it would start with a 28-year-old comedian telling jokes about the Bible. By 1968, the relationship between the Smothers brothers and CBS had become a Cold War. The censors weren't just making small cuts anymore. They were ordering entire sketches removed. They were telling the brothers which guests they absolutely could not have on the show. They were trying to control the show's message so completely that the brothers felt like they were just puppets reading scripts someone else had written. Tom Smothers, the younger brother and the creative force behind the show, started to realize something important. CBS was going to keep tightening the leash until there was nothing left. The network would claim they were just maintaining standards, but what they were really doing was silencing voices that challenged the establishment. And Tom decided he wasn't going to accept that. This is where things got strategic. Tom understood that CBS had a problem. They couldn't openly censor the show without admitting they were censoring it. So he started using the system against them. When CBS told him a sketch was too controversial, he would delay submitting it. When they demanded changes, he would fight back in meetings. He was testing them, probing for weak spots, trying to see exactly how far he could push. The network responded by creating more rules. If an episode wasn't delivered by a certain deadline, they said, they couldn't screen it properly and they wouldn't air it. Tom understood this was about control. The more time an episode spent in New York with the East Coast censors, the more likely it was to undergo additional censorship. So Tom started deliberately holding back episodes, calculating that missing a deadline was actually better than giving CBS more time to cut his show to pieces. Local CBS affiliates across the country were also complaining. In conservative areas, viewers were angry. They were writing letters. They were threatening to switch channels. CBS affiliates told the network they wanted fewer controversial sketches, fewer political guests, fewer jokes about religion or politics. The network was getting pressure from every direction. But here's what made this moment so important. Tom Smothers refused to accept that this was normal. He believed that a show with his creative vision couldn't exist if it was being strangled by censorship. Either CBS was going to let him make the show he wanted to make, or they could find someone else. He wasn't going to compromise. And that uncompromising attitude was about to collide with CBS's need for control in the most spectacular way possible. The fuse was lit. Everyone in the room could feel it. They just didn't know that the spark would come from a comedian nobody had heard of, telling jokes about the Bible in ways that would make network executives lose their minds. David Steinberg wasn't like other comedians. Basically a quiet, cerebral performer with a slow, methodical cadence, David Steinberg's conversational style was always brightened by a Groucho Marx-inspired penchant for iconoclasm and whimsy. He combined both traits in his famous mock sermons, the carefully enunciated lectures on biblical figures that always contained Marxian asides. What made Steinberg unique was that he actually knew what he was talking about. He wasn't some guy making fun of religion because it sounded edgy. Steinberg was a 28-year-old former rabbinical student whose scheduled sermonette on the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour was cited by CBS TV as the last straw in the network's feud with the since-canceled Smothers Brothers. But Steinberg's many religious comedy routines have been popular with both ministers and rabbis who have invited him to give his sermons in churches and synagogues. His act was deceptively simple. He would tell a Bible story, but he'd twist it in unexpected ways. In his retelling of Moses and the burning bush, God urges Moses to take off his shoes and approach. Moses burns his feet and God gleefully shouts, "Aha! Third one today." It sounds innocent when you read it, but when you heard it performed by Steinberg, with his careful timing and deadpan delivery, it was hilarious. And it was also making a point about God, about human nature, about the absurdity of religious authority. Tom Smothers discovered Steinberg performing at the Hungry Eye, a famous club in San Francisco. Tom immediately wanted Steinberg to be on the show because he was a different kind of comedian like they were. Tom couldn't get over the uniqueness of it. "Let's put it on the air," he said. The first time Steinberg appeared on the Smothers Brothers show, he did one of his sermons. One of his famous lines was, "I can't do Onan tonight. I suggest you go home tonight and do it yourself." The audience loved it, but CBS did not. Hate mail poured in from religious viewers who were offended. Conservative organizations complained. The network brass called Tom and said, "Do not bring this guy back." But that's exactly what made Tom want to bring him back. Because Steinberg wasn't being crude or disrespectful. He was being intelligent. He was being funny. And he was making people think about their beliefs in new ways. That's exactly the kind of content Tom believed television should have. That's exactly the kind of voice that CBS wanted to silence. Tom Smothers was about to make a decision that would destroy his show. He was going to invite David Steinberg back. And this time, he wasn't going to ask CBS for permission. He was just going to do it. The episode was taped on March 21, 1969. It was scheduled to air on April 6, 1969, and featured guests including Rowan and Martin, David Steinberg, and Nancy Wilson. Tom Smothers had made his choice. He was going to feature Steinberg in a full sermon monologue. And he wasn't going to ask CBS for approval first. When CBS executives saw the tape, they immediately ordered the sketch removed. No discussion. No negotiation. Just cut it out or we'll do it for you. But something was different this time. Tom Smothers said no. This wasn't a small decision. This was a direct act of defiance. The network had given him an explicit warning. They had told him Steinberg was off limits. And he had done it anyway. From CBS's perspective, this was insubordination. Tom was deliberately violating their rules. Tom was refusing to accept their authority over his show. David Steinberg remembered what happened next. A week later, Tom and I were hanging out, and he said, "I want to show you something." He opened up the door to his room and there were bundles of mail. "That's your hate mail," Tom said, as if I should be so pleased and excited by this. Tom was thrilled that it created such an uproar. That detail tells you everything about Tom Smothers' mindset. He wasn't worried about the hate mail. He wasn't scared of offending people. He was excited. He was energized by the fact that something they had done was so powerful, so provocative, that it made people react with genuine emotion. That's what he wanted from television, not bland safety, but real impact. But CBS was watching too. And they were making calculations of their own. The network had a business to run. They had affiliate stations demanding that they keep the show under control. They had advertisers worried about controversy. They had a reputation to protect. Every time the Smothers brothers pushed boundaries, it cost them something. So CBS made a strategic decision. They would not air the April 6th episode. CBS delayed the Baez episode and other episodes, using missed deadlines as an excuse to withhold them from broadcast. They were going to use procedural reasons, missed deadlines, contract violations, to keep controversial content off the air without admitting that's what they were doing. But the brothers were one step ahead. Tom Smothers understood exactly what was happening. CBS was using technicalities as a cover for censorship. And he had already decided what he was going to do about it. He was going to bring Steinberg back. One more time. And he was going to make sure it was the sermon that would break CBS completely. After CBS refused to air the April 6th episode with Steinberg's first sermon, you might think Tom Smothers would back down. He'd made his point. He'd shown his defiance. Any reasonable person would accept that CBS had won and move on. But Tom Smothers wasn't reasonable. He was principled. And he was angry. When CBS told Tom not to have another sermon, he said, "We're going to have Steinberg on again." And when Steinberg came back for another appearance, Tom asked him to do another sermon. This time, Steinberg chose the story of Jonah. The Jonah sermon was different from the Moses one. It wasn't just funny, it had an edge to it that touched on real social issues. One of the lines in that bit was, "And the Gentiles, as is their wont from time to time, threw the Jew overboard." It was a joke about prejudice, about scapegoating, about how societies have historically blamed minority groups for their problems. It was brilliant. It was also, from CBS's perspective, absolutely unacceptable. Tom knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't naive. He wasn't stumbling into controversy by accident. He was deliberately creating it. He was testing CBS's authority. He was asking a fundamental question. Who gets to decide what can and cannot be said on television? The network or the people creating the show? The episode was filmed and sent to CBS for approval. CBS promptly ordered the sketch removed. Tom Smothers refused. CBS executives saw this as defiance. Tom saw it as a matter of principle. This wasn't about one sermon anymore. This was about freedom of expression. This was about whether artists could create without having every word policed by corporate gatekeepers. Tom understood something that most people in 1969 didn't fully grasp. Television was the most powerful medium in America. It reached into every home. It shaped what people thought about. It influenced culture. And if networks could censor what went on television, then networks were controlling the national conversation. They were silencing voices that challenged the status quo. Tom believed in freedom of expression, especially during a time when the country was deeply divided. To cut the sketch was, to him, a betrayal of everything the show stood for. He wasn't just thinking about his own show. He was thinking about what this meant for all of television, for all of media, for the future of free speech in America. But Tom Smothers was about to learn that principles, no matter how noble, sometimes have a price. CBS had tolerated his defiance up to a point, but they had limits, and he was about to cross them in a way that would trigger a response so swift, so decisive, that it would shock the entire entertainment industry. The network was done negotiating. What happened next was unprecedented. The Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour was abruptly canceled by CBS in 1969 amid claims of breaching their contract and featuring potentially offensive content, following months of arguments over the show's content. The cancellation of the show came 2 weeks after it had been optioned for a 4th season, leading to a breach of contract lawsuit filed by the Smothers Brothers against CBS, which they won. Let that sink in for a moment. 2 weeks. That's how quickly things changed. The network had just officially renewed the show for a 4th season. CBS executives had signed off on it. The schedule was set. The future was locked in. And then, just 14 days later, they changed their minds completely and fired the entire show. The official reason CBS gave was that Tom and Dick Smothers had breached their contract. They'd missed deadlines. They'd failed to submit episodes on time for proper screening. It was a technical violation, the network claimed. Nothing to do with censorship. Nothing to do with David Steinberg. Just a simple matter of contract enforcement. But everyone involved knew the truth. Tom Smothers recalled that the network's protests were just a pretext to get them off the air. CBS was using procedural excuses to hide what was really a political decision. They were silencing a show because it was too controversial, because it was criticizing the war, because it was questioning authority, because it was making religious jokes that offended powerful constituencies. The timing was deliberately cruel. The episode that was supposed to air on April 13, 1969, the one with David Steinberg's Jonah sermon, never made it to broadcast. The episode was taped, edited, and ready to go. But CBS made sure it never saw the light of day. Instead of the Smothers Brothers, viewers tuned in to CBS that night and got Hee Haw, a country music variety show with absolutely nothing controversial about it. But here's what's important. Tom Smothers didn't go quietly. The Smothers Brothers weren't about to go quietly. They sued CBS for breach of contract, claiming the network had violated their creative rights. They took the network to court. They fought back publicly. They refused to accept that CBS had the right to censor them this way. The battle didn't end on April 4, 1969. It was just beginning, because Tom Smothers had realized something crucial. If CBS could do this to him, if a major network could fire a hit show for political reasons, then no artist in America was safe. No voice was truly free, and someone had to stand up and say that this wasn't acceptable. That someone was going to be Tom Smothers, and he was willing to fight for years to prove his point. The unaired episode from April 13, 1969, became legendary. People talked about it in whispers. What was so dangerous about it? What could possibly be so offensive that a major network would rather cancel an entire show than let America see it? The mystery became part of the story. The episode that should have aired on April 13th included guest stars like Teddy Neely, a star of Broadway's controversial Hair, as well as jazz singer Nancy Wilson, who performed solo but also joined up with Tom to create comedic material about racists and the censorship of interracial romance. It was provocative. It was political. It was exactly the kind of content that CBS executives feared would upset their affiliate stations and advertisers. But the most important part of that episode was, of course, David Steinberg's sermon about Jonah. The sermon included the line, "And the Gentiles, as is their wont from time to time, threw the Jew overboard." A joke about prejudice and scapegoating that CBS found absolutely intolerable. Not because it was crude or vulgar, but because it was truthful. Because it made people think. Because it challenged comfortable assumptions about tolerance and acceptance. For years, that episode remained hidden. Tom Smothers fought to get it released, but CBS refused. They claimed it was proprietary material. They said they owned it and had the right to keep it locked away forever. It was censorship in its purest form, not just preventing something from being broadcast, but preventing it from existing in the public consciousness at all. Then came the lawsuit. The case went to court, and in 1973 they won. For years after being fired, the Smothers brothers proved in a court of law that CBS had violated their creative rights. The network had breached the contract. CBS had used censorship as a weapon against them. Tom Smothers recalled that he and his brother filed a breach of contract lawsuit that CBS lost. "We had such a minor payment dollar-wise, but that wasn't the point. We had to do it," he said. This wasn't about money for Tom. It was about vindication. It was about proving that what CBS had done was wrong. It was about establishing that artists have rights, that networks can't just silence voices they disagree with, that censorship has consequences. The victory was bittersweet. The show was dead. The momentum was gone. Other networks had moved on to safer content. The cultural moment had passed. But Tom Smothers had won something more important than ratings or money. He had won the moral argument. He had proven that he was right and CBS was wrong. And slowly, over the years, that lost episode started circulating. People found copies. Historians studied it. Universities preserved it. The thing CBS had tried to bury forever became evidence of their own wrongdoing. The sermon that was supposed to be forgotten became immortal. The Smothers brothers didn't just lose their show. They changed television. The Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour was one of the most controversial television shows in the medium's history. Questions of taste and the Smothers' oppositional politics led to very public battles over censorship. But those battles mattered. They established a precedent. They showed that networks couldn't simply erase voices they disagreed with without facing consequences. After the Smothers brothers were canceled, something shifted in the industry. Networks started to realize that absolute censorship wasn't sustainable. If they pushed too hard, if they silenced too many voices, they'd face lawsuits like CBS did. They'd lose in court. They'd damage their reputation. So gradually, almost imperceptibly, the boundaries started to shift. The show became increasingly political, featuring activist celebrities and producing its own political material criticizing the Vietnam War and the politicians who supported it. That sounds normal to us now. But in 1967, that was radical. That was dangerous. That was something networks actively fought against. The Smothers brothers proved it was possible. They showed that you could have a hit show that was also politically engaged, socially conscious, and genuinely challenging. Think about what's on television now. Think about Saturday Night Live making jokes about sitting presidents. Think about comedians on every major network criticizing politicians, religious institutions, and social norms. Think about late-night hosts devoting entire monologues to controversial political topics. None of that would exist if the Smothers brothers hadn't fought CBS in 1969. David Steinberg's sermons were controversial because religious satire was taboo. But after the Smothers brothers won their lawsuit, after the culture shifted, Steinberg went on to have a long, respected career. He performed his Bible jokes in actual churches and synagogues. Religious leaders invited him to perform. What CBS had deemed unbroadcastable became a respected art form. But there's something deeper here too. The Smothers brothers weren't just fighting for the right to make jokes. They were fighting for the principle that television should reflect reality. That it should engage with the issues that matter to people. That it shouldn't be sanitized and controlled and stripped of all genuine human emotion. They were fighting for authenticity in a medium that desperately needed it. The Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour may have been canceled in 1969, but its legacy continues to resonate. In an age where comedians regularly spar with politicians and satire is a daily fixture in our news feeds, the boldness of the Smothers Brothers seems almost prophetic. They weren't just canceled, they were silenced for saying what needed to be said at a time when few dared to say it. The most important thing about their story is this: they didn't accept defeat as final. They went to court, they fought back, and they won. That matters, because it proved that power, even the enormous power of a major television network, isn't absolute, can be challenged, can be questioned. It can be defeated by people who refuse to accept injustice. Tom Smothers chose principle over comfort. He chose freedom over security. He chose to fight even when the odds were against him. And because he did, television was never the same again. Because he refused to have David Steinberg's sermon cut from his show, comedians today can say almost anything on television without fear of immediate cancellation. The Smothers Brothers lost their show, but they won something far more valuable. They proved that artists matter, that voices matter, that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to be silenced. So here's the question for you. Do you think Tom Smothers made the right choice? Was it worth losing the show to make a stand for creative freedom? And if you were in his position, facing down a major network and knowing you might lose everything, would you have done the same thing? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to see the lost episode that CBS tried to bury forever, there are actually copies out there now. History has a way of bringing the truth to light, no matter how hard powerful people try to hide it.